This is I Am Vermont 2, and my name is Sha'an Mouliert. I Am Vermont 2 is modeled after the I Too Am Harvard initiative. The I Am Vermont 2 photo story project shines a light on the diversity of identities and experiences of people of color across the state of Vermont. The I Am Vermont 2 project is a medium for people of color to tell our stories and to convey how racism has a significant impact in our lives. This is the first known statewide multi-generation project done only by people of color living, working, and going to school in the state. It is also a vehicle to outreach for the People of Color Caucus. Social justice activist Grace Lee Boggs said, "Creativity is the key to human liberation." A poem, A House of Refuge. Lyrics to a song yet to be composed by Arnold Isidore Thomas. Copyright 2019. Let me be your house of refuge. Come and be my refugee. All your burdens I will carry. Come and rest a while with me. And regardless of your failings, I will not your judgment be, for you will find your sanctuary in me. Tossed and turned by changing patterns of life's ever-changing winds that have carried you from here to there and back to where you've been. Are you losing all your senses, living out or in between? Something real or a nightmare's heartless scheme? I'm the urge that keeps you living when your flesh has run its course. I'm your quest for greater meaning in a world of great remorse. I'm your word of inspiration during nights of dark despair. I'm the flame of your salvation. Hold my light within your care. Let me be your house of refuge. Come and be my refugee. From your cold and weary wanderings, a warm haven I will be. And though all may criticize you, I will not your judgment be, for you'll find your sanctuary in me. I am delighted to introduce my guest today, Reverend Arnold Isidore Thomas. Welcome to the program, and thank you for your comforting poem. I look forward to hearing the final project. I first met Arnold about 15 years ago when he was the United Church of Christ Conference Minister, and I was a part of the UCC's Uprooting Racism Task Force. Before you tell your viewers about yourself, can you share what it was like to be asked to be a guest on today's program?
Well, I was honored that you invited me, and it was also good to just reconnect with you, Sha'an. After so many years, we've been working together in my capacity as Vermont Conference Minister, and then, as you know, I went away for several years to a more multicultural environment in New York City, and then after basically about 10 years being away, it was good to come back and reconnect with individuals such as yourself. So I'm honored to be here.
Well, it has been a pleasure. It is a pleasure. It had been a pleasure to reconnect with you. I remember when I saw you, I think it was at the event that Curtis Reed had put together, and you had come back and spoke at that. And that was, I would say, following up on an event that you had been trying to organize, a black tie affair where folks of color could come together. I am grateful, feel blessed for Vermont that you're back here. And can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
I am, obviously, I'm an African-American minister who has served as conference minister to the United Church of Christ here in Vermont. That's actually the reason that I came to Vermont back in 1998. So I've been in Vermont for a little over 20 years, and grew up in Ohio, was born in Cleveland, Ohio, in East Cleveland, raised in Akron, Ohio. So I basically was born in a predominantly black environment, in which, in that environment, I thought the entire world was black. And then my father, who was also a minister, his day job was that of an inspector for Pennsylvania Railroad. So when he became an inspector, it moved the family from Cleveland to Akron, Ohio, a predominantly Italian section of Akron, Ohio. So my worldview was radically changed from predominantly black to a very integrated environment. And that's the place where I grew up. And I went to school in a small college, Hiram, Ohio, and from there on to Yale University. And from there, ministry in Arkansas, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New York City, back to Vermont. That's where I've been.
Well, you certainly have had, I would say, I want to say colorful in a way of varying experiences. So a little bit about your family.
Well, my original family was that my father was a Baptist minister, inspector for the Pennsylvania Railroad. My mother was an elementary school teacher, so I had that environment growing up, and had two other brothers. One came out and identified as gay, black. Unfortunately, he passed away of AIDS back in '84 when the AIDS epidemic was really starting to take hold. And I have an older brother, his name is Michael, who still lives in Akron, Ohio, and a sister who lives in Cleveland, Ohio. My wife, Vicki, is a nurse at UVM Medical Center, psychiatric nurse. She works the night shift. So I try to keep a sane household when she returns. Can't promise her anything. And I have 3 adult children. My oldest, Devin, is also a United Church of Christ minister, serving 3 parishes in Jeffersonville, Bakersfield, and Waterville, Vermont, just north of where I am in Jericho. And my middle child, Ethan, works for Hannaford's. And my youngest daughter is a photographer in Concord, New Hampshire. So they basically grew up in, well, they spent much of their years in the Vermont public education school system, where I think they experienced more overt and covert racism than I, and but they weathered the storm and did well, I think, as students in Vermont. My daughter went to school in New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Institute of Art, and I think because of her experiences have chose not to return to Vermont. She loves life in Concord, New Hampshire. She even though New Hampshire itself is one of the whitest states in the Union, I think second or third in comparison to Maine, Vermont, and then New Hampshire, the community in which she lives, Concord, is more diverse culturally and racially than her experiences here in Vermont. So she wants to stay there, and she seems to be enjoying life there, and that's fine with me.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question of what it's like for your family living in Vermont. And I think you gave an apt description. Is there anything that you might want to add to that around their experience? And I'm thinking especially in context as a parent, because one of the reasons I moved to Vermont was to provide a better life for my child.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I really wasn't aware of what I was unleashing. Mm-hmm. I was not aware of the experiences and adverse experiences that happened to my child in school. Actually, that's how I first got involved, because I had to be an advocate for them. And I wonder, I think today as a parent, would I have made a different decision, you know, had I had that information? And I also know that I wasn't told everything.
Yeah.
And as I got older, you know, I found out and I was told, and a lot of it was trying to protect me. So in that context, like your family's experience, and you know, school or
Well, you need to know that my wife is European American, and when I came to Vermont for the first time, when I came to Vermont, it was a summer in between graduating from college and going to seminary at Yale. And I fell in love with the state. I had never been in such a rural setting before, in such a beautiful setting. So, but I could not imagine any circumstance where I, an African American, would be returning to the state for vocational purposes or anything. But the setting, the summer I was in Vermont, and this was back in '76, was one in which I served as a vacation church school supervisor. So basically, I was an itinerant church school supervisor. I would set up a church school, conduct that church school for 2 weeks, and then break it down, move on to another setting. So I served 4 churches while I was here in '76. Make a long story short, I graduated from seminary, served a parish in Vermont, Connecticut, Williamstown, Massachusetts, and while in Williamstown, Massachusetts, I got word that Vermont Conference, UCC, was looking for a conference minister. So I thought, this is the opportunity. I will apply for that position. And discovered that several people that I had served with in '76 were on the search committee. So I felt right at home, and it was an opportunity to catch up with them, to share what has been happening to me since then, and to share also my vision for the churches in Vermont. And I think we hit it off very well. I was accepted as conference minister, served 7 years in that capacity, and it was both fulfilling but also challenging, because I recognized that I was at that time one of the very few people of color in the entire state of Vermont serving in a leadership capacity. I was the first executive minister over a denomination in the state, and realized that you mentioned microaggression. I don't think as an individual I was the victim of what I would consider microaggression, people inquiring about me because of who I was as a person of color, trying to figure out more, trying to do things that I would think were offensive. But there was one situation where I was introducing myself to a particular church congregation, and a member in the back row stood up and asked, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Well, I'm here because I accepted the position as conference minister. I want to serve the congregations, try to strengthen their capacity in the state." And he asked again, "No, but why are you really here?" So in sensing the implications of his question, I said, Vermont is a state of beautiful, colorful foliage that is in desperate need of beautiful, colorful people. He sat down, I heard no more from him. And in many ways that is true, because at the time I arrived, and I think to some extent it's still true, but at the time I arrived, there were less than a fraction of 1% people of color in this state. And everywhere I went, I was always conscious that I was not just representing myself. I was representing, whether I liked it or not, people of color throughout the state, and in some cases throughout the country. What I did would make an impression on people who, in many cases, had never had any meaningful contact with a person of color in their life. So whether I liked it or not, I had to be conscious and always aware of that wherever I went in the state.
Thank you. And you bring up a strategy and a situation, a phenomenon that we find ourselves in, of having to, at the same time, advocate and be representing ourselves, as well as representing as a group, and what that stands for. I wanted to go back for a moment and about your microaggression, and I really appreciate the example that you gave of how you mediated that. At that time, and saying, how do we tease out, but how were you feeling? When that person, that instant that they said it, what was that feeling for you?
Well, the feeling was one in which I anticipated something like that would occur. And when it did occur, I was somewhat surprised that it had not occurred earlier. Because again, going into a situation where you are the only person of color in a predominantly white setting, you prepare yourselves for those kind of encounters. So I was not in any way stressed by it. And unfortunately, I think this is the situation that most African Americans find themselves. They live into the stress to the point where it becomes natural for them. And so in anticipating that, I just kind of responded to it and hoped that my response would be such that he would not further antagonize the situation. And again, I'm not quite sure if that's what he meant to do, but certainly that's how I felt, and that's how I think many people around me felt as well. Vermont tries to convey itself as a progressive community, but in fact, you have people of all stripes within this community, and I do think that that the state, for the most part, is comprised of people who are trying to do the best they can. But when they realize that they are in a state that has been dubbed the whitest state in the Union, where white supremacists, because it is the whitest state of the Union, are trying to find a haven in trying to promote their brand of whiteness, you have to realize that it is not the place where you would like it to be, and that Vermont is a community, is a state that has some growing to do in trying to face the reality of its own racism, its own racist past, and how it is able to confront the situation of prejudice that exists among all kinds of people, even well-intentioned people who recognize that they are products of this environment. We have to do some honest soul searching, and it's people of color that can help incite the conversation.
Oh, I couldn't have said it any better. There's so much richness. And in what you said, and I think about, when I said, what did you need, or what are you feeling, what do you need? And for many folks, that they shut down. For many folks of color, whether they're triggered and they shut down. For some, they'll come up and they're able to describe, what the various feelings. I felt discounted. I felt stupid. I felt scared. And in asking, what was needed, in back to your statement around people get into the feeling and they stay into the feeling, and many times that feeling is anger, and that not being able to move towards, well, what do you need? It's here's my anger is justified. Well, what I was hearing from you, because of your experience and having these engagements, knowing yourself, being able to have self-care, that maybe not anticipating exactly what someone's going to say, but knowing it's possible that it comes up. I can say for me, and I think I shared with you earlier today, that when it comes up in places I don't expect, I'm not prepared for, that's what the surprise is, and it's impossible to be diligent all the time. That keeps the stress up. And in moving forward, for me to be able, and others, to ask, what do I need? How do we resolve this situation? And I, again, applaud you for the wonderful example in that process, to give both folks of color and white folks that opportunity to think about that. Just question, and you said you did not necessarily, except for that one, microaggressions towards you. So thinking in terms or the context of generally, what barriers, if any, do you think maybe you have put up because of microaggressions? And you may not have. If there are, can you share?
I think there are barriers that I naturally have to put up to protect myself and, to some extent, my family from incidents of microaggression. One of those barriers is, and you mentioned it earlier, is the desire to bring people of color together in a setting where they can share their experiences and create a common agenda in which they can deal with their living social, cultural, environmental situation of being African American in Vermont. And I specifically want to work with African Americans, realizing that once we start with a particular group, that will expand from there. But I, as an African American, even though I represent a multifaceted, multiracial religious community, which is time consuming in and of itself, it is important that I, as an African American leader in this state, try to initiate programs and efforts in which we can come together as people of color, as African Americans, share our experiences, but also share our dreams of what we want to accomplish as a people within this state. I recognize that when it comes to the political process of this state, the voice of African Americans are left out, nil. There are, again, well-intentioned white folks who are trying to represent a very inclusive posture, an inclusive voice, but unless African Americans, unless black people in this state coalesce around common concerns and interests and agendas and create a voice by which whites can listen to, hear, and respond to, create a situation where they are advocating and choosing candidates that they would like to run for office, I don't think that we're going to be heard all that well. Another thing I try to do for my own, one of the reasons I am wearing this collar, for instance, is as a UCC minister, I was not required to wear a collar. I am now a UCC minister serving a Lutheran congregation. And it is more commonplace for pastors within the Lutheran Church to wear a collar visibly. And I'm discovering just how less intimidating my presence as an African American is in this predominantly white environment when I am wearing the collar. If I were to walk into a store, into a setting as just myself, without the collar, without the garb, people would feel more threatened by my presence. When they see me as a cleric, as a member of the clergy, the guard goes down. And so, well, and some may, because of what the church has done, in some cases the guard may go up. But in my case, in most cases, the guard will come down. I actually had an individual in the community, in my community of Jericho. I was walking in the store and was purchasing some items. He saw that I was wearing a collar and he said, let me buy your stuff for you. My mother would have a fit if I did not honor your presence in my store. So that's something I know would not happen if I were not wearing this collar. So it provides a means by which barriers can come down, and people will see me in a less intimidating, less threatening fashion than if I were simply to be myself. And that's unfortunate, but it's the reality in which we live.
That collar gives you power.
Yeah, I guess it does.
It is a power. And how people respond to power, just as you said, the difference of your role in one place and in another. And the, to me, encouraging thing about this time in Vermont, as we put in many years, is that there are more efforts and organizations, agencies that are led by folks of color. The Vermont Coalition for Ethnic and Equitable Studies in Schools was not only multi-issue and multi-ethnic. It was one of the first times, I can say for me, that I've been able to not only work in that kind of a coalition and be able to have such a positive result. The other thing is the People of Color Caucus. So back when there was that event that Curtis had put together, one of the things that was most powerful for me was the first time I had ever been in a room with that many folks of color. The energy of resilience was something I had never experienced. I've been in Vermont almost for 20-some years at that time. Last November, we had a People of Color caucus and retreat. It was 2 days down in November down in Brattleboro. And I Am Vermont Too is a medium for that outreach for People of Color caucus, which I am inviting you to be a part. We are having, in the process of organizing another one. This is annual. We are organizing the caucus. We already have platforms, issues that are of concern, such as mass incarceration, health, well-being, our schools, our youth, economic development. So it is a different time, which we hadn't had, and using this again as a way to not only reach out to those folks, something that I want to also say around another purpose is for folks of color not to feel so isolated. In what you were sharing, two things that you said, I had an immediate connection. My grandfather had settled in Cleveland, And earlier we had talked about, great-grandmother that I had just
Yeah.
met. So my father's family all lived in Cleveland. Things got a little better. They moved to Shaker Heights. And I too had a brother who had passed away from complications around AIDS. And it was 92. And what I had thought, if he could probably have lived just another year, things would have been different. So the connections of the populations where families came from,
Yeah.
and then the connection of what AIDS did to the Black community. And I know my brother had struggled about being gay in that in the community. So. Are there any final little nugget you might want to say in closing?
Well, I am in the church partly because I'm trying to encourage people to see their sense of what is most important in their life, what is considered for them the principle by which they would live their life and even die for. That, in my understanding, is a notion of God, a God-centered individual. Whether that person believes in God or not, if that person adheres to a principle that he or she is willing to live by and even die for, that person is a God-centered individual. It is difficult to see individuals, to bring that out in individuals as well as in society. But I do think it is the spiritual element that lies within all individuals that I'm trying to explore, probe, and work with, because I think, and this definitely includes Black people as well, because I do see Black people as very spiritually oriented. We come out of that environment. That's where our power was really encouraged to try and bring that out within the Black community here in Vermont and also within the wider community. If we can understand ourselves as spiritual beings, I think the sky is the limit. And so that's in my work here in Vermont, in my work within the church, in my work within society, I see Vermont as a wonderful testing ground for that to happen. It may be seen as the community, the state where you have the least number of people involved in organized religion. That may be partly a result of the damage that organized religion has done to people, and they're trying to pursue their own spiritual path towards truth. So if I can assist in whatever way possible in helping people do that, I'm willing to do so.
Amen. Oh, I'd like to thank you again, Arnold,
Thank you.
for being my guest and for sharing your experience and your poem. And thank you, viewers, for watching. I am Vermont 2. Please like us on Facebook.